Ram trucks built to serve.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to First Things First. Jenna Wolf, Nick Wright, Kevin Watts. We got Chris Broussard with us. We'll let you know why in just a second. Coming up here on a Monday morning, the draft is over, but the commiseration may have just begun for Aaron Rodgers and maybe even for Carson Wentz. We'll discuss that. Also, what does the draft now mean for Cam Newton? But Chris Broussard is here, so our first story is The Last Dance. Here we go. Episodes 3 and 4 of the Chicago Bulls' much-hyped documentary aired last night and did not disappoint. One of the areas of focus was the very flamboyant, often misunderstood, but integral part of the Bulls dynasty, and that's Dennis Rodman. We also saw Phil Jackson's impact on the team and the Chicago Bulls' eventual overtaking of the Pistons as the best team in the East. Nick, we got a lot to unpack on this one. I'll start with you. What was your biggest takeaway from what you saw last night?
My biggest takeaway last night was another reminder at how criminally underrated Isaiah Thomas has become by the younger generation and by the analytics generation. Isaiah's raw numbers, counting numbers, or even advanced stats will never do him full justice. He was on a team with 0 other elite offensive players, and he had them potentially 1 sprained ankle or 2 Kareem Abdul-Jabbar free throws away in 1988 from a three-peat. He was up against super team after super team. The Lakers with Magic, Kareem, and Worthy. The Celtics with 4 Hall of Famers, 5 if you want to throw in Walton. Jordan's Bulls, and he had them going toe-to-toe year after year with those guys, including a period of time where they were the best team in the league, and it all centered around him. We focus on the defense and the toughness, but none of it plays without Isaiah. And you could see it a little bit in the doc. I saw it a little bit firsthand when about a year ago, I had said on the show that Steph Curry now was the 2nd greatest point guard ever behind Magic. And Isaiah came on the show, and I think it was off the air. He's like, so Steph's better than me? How's Steph better than me? Because he understood what I think a lot of people don't, which is you can't just look at the numbers. And Isaiah's contribution to winning and putting a roadblock up, ending the Celtics and pre-Jordan is very, very important. My other takeaway, Broussard, was this. I remember watching you on television. I don't remember exactly why this came up, but it was a couple months ago, and you said something along the lines of, nobody got championships on Jordan's watch. And I just remember I was watching this, and I'm like, well, it seems like a lot of people did, though. Like, you know, all the Magic, Kareem, and Worthy, they all got titles. Obviously, Bird and McHale and Parrish and Walton, they got titles. Isaiah and those guys got titles. Akeem and Clyde got a title. I know we're not allowed to count the Wizards years, but then you have Duncan and Robinson and Shaq and Kobe. So, no, it didn't happen. Of course, it didn't happen. So it's really just Barkley and Malone and Ewing didn't get titles. But it was just a reminder there were championships won from 85 to 98 that weren't those 6 Bulls titles. But my bigger takeaway, Broussard, was the greatness of Isaiah Thomas.
Okay, I must respond to this. First of all, the Jordan watch officially began in 1991. So that pre-91 was not the Jordan watch. But that was a very astute point you made, Nick, about Isaiah. I'm glad you made it. Most millennials are lost when it comes, and most analytic guys are lost when it comes to Isaiah Thomas. And you mentioned the numbers. His numbers now, analytically, they may not be great, but Isaiah Thomas joins Magic Johnson and Oscar Robertson as the only players ever to retire having averaged 19 points and 9 assists a game for their careers. Isaiah also is the only superstar who can say he beat Bird, Magic, and Jordan in their prime. And to your point, Nick, he did it without another top 50 teammate. And Bird obviously had plenty of them. Magic had plenty of them. And Jordan had Scottie Pippen. So I'm glad you brought that up about Isaiah Thomas. But my biggest takeaway was what made Phil Jackson great. And we saw that. And Phil Jackson has got to be considered the GOAT, I would think, among NBA coaches of all time. But you saw that Phil Jackson understood you coach different players different ways. He understood Dennis Rodman was a different type of guy. So he gave him leeway. There are a lot of NBA coaches, and it's hard to blame them, who would have been like, what? You got to go to Las Vegas in the middle of the season? Are you crazy? And they would have let their ego get in the way and not let him go. And maybe that could have ambushed the team. But he let him go, understood he was different, and then didn't even let his ego get in the way when Rodman didn't come back in the 48 hours that had been allotted. And obviously everything was fine by the way Phil handled that. But yet he had his non-negotiables where he was stern on them and would not budge. One being respect. He first meets Dennis Rodman at Jerry Krause's house and says, stand up and take off your hat so we can shake hands. So he wanted Rodman to give him the respect if he was going to be able to coach him. And then with Jordan didn't want to play the triangle. Jordan didn't want the ball moving all over the place. He wanted it in his hands, but Phil was non-negotiable on that, and it obviously helps them end up winning the 6 championships. So I thought you got a good glimpse into what made Phil Jackson such a great coach.
I think it was also super interesting, Chris. Donovan Mitchell pointed out that Phil Jackson was the first one to institute load management. So I thought that was fascinating. Jenna, I wonder if this happened now, if a player had to go to Las Vegas, how it would be taken by the media at large.
If a player had to go to Las Vegas, I have to. I have no other choice but to go.
Vegas.
Hey, Nick had to. Nick, I want to get your take on what Broussard had to say, because there was this dichotomy between the intense Michael Jordan and the seemingly laid-back Phil Jackson, just in his approach at least, that sort of zen-like. You saw that scene where they took their shoes off. They were practicing some sort of breathing technique on the floor. You know, one guy was so intense and one guy had different approach. And even in the beginning, they didn't gel, right? Michael wanted the ball. Phil wanted everyone to have the ball. What do you think about what you learned from Phil Jackson and how these two really found a way to make it work and be successful?
Well, I think it is a vivid and important reminder that an enormous part of the Michael Jordan story is him linking up with the most successful, arguably, professional coach in any sport ever. Like, it is so hard to win championships in pro sports. It is incredibly difficult to win multiple championships. And now if we're talking about the handful of guys that have a handful of rings, you're talking about guys with 4, 5, 6 rings, what do they all have in common? The great player is married up for either a part of or the entirety of their championship window, an all-time great coach. Bradshaw had Noel. Montana, for multiple of his championships, had Walsh. Kobe, obviously, had Phil for all 5 titles. Shaq had Phil for 3 of his titles, Pat Riley for the other one. Michael had Phil for all 6. Duncan had Popovich for all 5. Magic had Pat Riley for 4 of his 5. It is basically impossible, if not unprecedented, in sports history to become. Jeter had Joe Torre, to become a guy that has more than 2 or 3 rings, unless you are married to a coach who is going to help guide you along the way. Because I think Wildes, I get your takeaway on this, I thought it was very instructive when Doug Collins went over the list of Michael Jordan accomplishments in his 3 years with him. He's like, well, he won a league MVP, he won an all-star MVP, he won scoring titles, he won Defensive Player of the Year. And then Phil Jackson walks in and is like, Michael, you're going to have to change. I think the vast majority of coaches in NBA history would not have been able to do that. But, Kevin, that obviously was exactly what Michael and the Bulls needed. So I just think it's an incredibly important part of the story.
So I don't know if you're setting me up here, but I'm going to toss the ball back to you, Nick. Michael had Dean Smith and Roy Williams, and then he had Bobby Knight in the Olympics. Then he moves on. He eventually has Doug Collins and Phil Jackson. It seems like, and this is why I thought this was a wrestling move setup that you're setting me up for to drop an elbow on me, that the only great player who didn't have a great coach was LeBron James. Is this was that whole take a setup for me to toss it back to you?
Listen, I didn't.
Of course.
I hadn't even thought of LeBron.
I mean,
throughout
I
this.
fell into that.
You know why? I wouldn't try. Listen, this is a celebration of Michael Jordan, so I wouldn't want to bring up the only athlete in American history that trumps him. So I think it's unfair. But you do, Wilds. I hadn't thought of it, but Broussard brings up a good point. I mean, now that I think about it, I'm like, yeah, you know, all the guys. I mean, even back to Russell with Auerbach, like all the all-time greats. They did have that one iconic coach along with them for either all or most of the way. It's a good point, Wilds. I hadn't thought about Broussard. I don't know your takeaway on it. But I guess
true? You hadn't
LeBron
thought of
hasn't
it?
had that.
I must say
it hadn't occurred to me, Broussard.
Nick has made some unusually astute points today, so I'll give him credit for that. But look, I agree with Nick. I've long said that had LeBron been linked up with one of the all-time greats, a Phil Jackson, a Greg Popovich, or a Pat Riley, maybe a Larry Brown, he would have more championships. And then I think if he has more championships, he's probably widely recognized as the GOAT. But Phil Jackson understood this, that no matter how great your one player is, if your team focuses too much around that one player and he does everything essentially, you're going to have trouble winning at the highest level. Michael Jordan, Nick mentioned the accolades he got under Doug Collins. How about his numbers? 1 year he averaged 37 points on 48% shooting for Doug Collins. The next year, 35.6 assists on 54% shooting. The next year, 32, 8, and 8 on 54% shooting. His numbers were astronomical and efficient under Doug Collins